We're going to be privileged today to hear from Alex Kerr. Alex has written a book about his exploits in before World War II and during World War II. I don't want to take anything from him, but he's not going to be able to tell you all that happened to him in the time that he was in the forces. And so it's going to be an abridged version today. He's written a book about it, and the book will be available later on. Copies over there, and you can get into that. Alex grew up in West Leadenhall, had a Scottish father, joined the Cameron Highlanders as a young lad, and then during the war ended up in the first EFTS course at Cunderdin, and things went on from there. Alex is going to be assisted by his daughter Robin today.
During the war, after I was shot down, I actually kept a diary, and that was just for my kids and for friends and that sort of thing after the war. But of course in the last 2 or 3 years, last 5 probably, maybe even more than that, there's been a resurgence of interest in World War II stories, and I've been under a great deal of pressure to make this public, so I've succumbed to that, and we ended up with a book. So, let's go. It was the afternoon of Anzac Day in 1940. I was at the Northern Races with my friend Tom Nisbet. It was the first time either of us had been to a race meeting, and we had beginner's luck with our modest bets, and we were feeling very warm and happy. We'd both put our ages up 2 years to join the 16th Battalion Cameron Highlanders, and now we were sergeants in the Northern Army camp preparing for war. Little did I know what was waiting for me when I returned to camp that afternoon from the races. The message was cryptic. It just said, "Sergeant Kerr, report to Lieutenant Colonel Lloyd immediately." So, after sprucing myself up, I duly reported to the battalion commander. He was not happy. With a face like thunder, he tossed a piece of paper across the table. "Kerr, what's the meaning of this? I spent months training you to be an efficient soldier, and now this." From that moment, my life changed dramatically. The paper was an order from the Colonel to release me for service into the RAAF. Thereafter, things happened very quickly. In a few days, my long-time dream came true, and I was inducted into the first course of trainee pilots in 1940. The German ambulance bumped and swayed as it sped in the dark along the rough country road in 1941. The rough movement of the ambulance threw me from one side of the stretcher to the other, making me strain against the leather straps that held me in. My breathing was laboured. I was in pain, but it was more a mental pain than physical. I was bleeding from my chest, arm and leg in a sticky mixture of torn leather, torn fur and torn flesh and blood. It wasn't really a pleasant sight, and as I fought for each breath, I became convinced that I didn't have much more than minutes to spare. Several times I tried to end it by holding my breath. Only later did I realise how pointless this was. Try it yourself, you can't do it. Trying to do the impossible. The headlights of the ambulance, striving to shine through the meagre wartime splits, splintered the darkness with 2 shafts of light. and partly lit up the road ahead with its narrow beam. It was headed for Schleswig-Holstein on the Danish border. I woke as the ambulance skidded to a halt on a gravel drive outside Schleswig Hospital. Dawn was just breaking, and there was a briskness in the air as the sun started to peep over the distant hills. I was in no mood to appreciate this, however, as I was hustled into the operating theatre, and there I submitted reluctantly to the sickly smelling mask that was gently placed over my face. On May the 10th, 1941, 27-year-old German night fighter, pilot Lieutenant Eckhard Wilhelm von Bonnen of the 11th Night Fighter Group No. 1, piloting a Bf-110 twin-engine night fighter, had been vectored in to a Sechsrad-Tonic northwest of Hamburg to pounce upon returning bombers. His task was eased by a burst of flak which had set on fire the hydraulics of the rear gun turret of a Wellington bomber R1379 KOB of 115 Squadron RAF, operating out of Marham, Norfolk. The fire, in turn, provided a focal point for a master searchlight with its blue beam, which immediately focused a full cone of searchlights on the stricken aircraft. Things began to happen quickly. Von Bonnen could not figure out why the rear gun turret of his prey was not turning towards him, but he was approaching his quarry fast and had no time to ponder. He pressed his gun button and his tracers showed a direct hit on the target, which immediately burst into flames. And as he pulled away, he saw the flames spreading and he knew that he had made his first kill. That's his signature right up at the top of that painting, 50 years later. As an aside, by a remarkable coincidence, I met von Bonnen 50 years later and began correspondence with him. We were his first victim. He became a much decorated ace with a tally of 41 aircraft. In 1991, he met my crew at a Luftwaffe base for a weekend of reminiscing. The Wellington's target for the night was the Blumenvoss Aircraft Works in Hamburg. A nasty target, well known and feared for its intense anti-aircraft defences. When von Bonnen attacked us, we were on our way home, having bombed our target. I was in the astro hatch, watching the dark shape approaching and giving instructions to the captain when von Bonnen pressed his button. I saw a hail of tracers flash straight towards me, and in less than a second, 7 of them had hit me, and the impact knocked me flat on my back on the floor. My rear gunner crawled into the body of the aircraft, saw me lying there, dragged me to the escape hatch, clipped on my parachute, put my hand on the ripsaw and said, "For Christ's sake, pull it," and pushed me into space. The blazing aircraft landed in Tuning, much the worse for wear, and I landed near Tuning, also much the worse for wear. 6 months later, I walked through the gates of Stalag 3E, a small prison camp which lay about 90 kilometres south of Berlin. It contained 185 aircrew prisoners, housed in 3 small huts. Unlike most of the other aircrew camps in Germany, it was administered by the Army, the Wehrmacht, rather than the Luftwaffe. I had cheated death with the help of my rear gunner, who threw me out of the burning plane, and also a prominent French surgeon whose skill was widely known in Europe. He was a prisoner in a hospital for French prisoners. It was the closest POW hospital to where I landed by parachute unconscious. After an incredible series of lucky happenings, my wounds had almost healed and I was finally discharged from hospital. Barely had I arrived in the camp when planning got underway to dig a tunnel leading north to an empty field across which, we believed, an escape could be made at night. 5 months later, after much laborious digging in the sandy soil, the tunnel was nearly complete. It was May 1942, and it was estimated that we had but another 10 metres to go to breach the fence. We had used bedboards to shore up the sides and top to prevent collapses, and the gloomy tunnel was lit here and there by small cheese tins with pyjama cords soaked in margarine. The sweating Kriegies, Kriegsgefangene, German for prisoner of war, the sweating Kriegies worked their shifts in claustrophobic silence, gasping to get their share of the foul-smelling air filtering down through the 3 air holes that spiralled up to the surface from the rudimentary lamps. We were about 9 feet below the surface. Cardboard Red Cross boxes filled with sand, dug out at the tunnel face with empty food tins and passed down through the legs of a line of crouching men, provided the delivery system for the spoil, which was distributed surreptitiously around the compound outside. The longer the tunnel became, the worse became the working conditions, of course, and the problem of soil disposal and the problem of claustrophobia. Everything was going reasonably well until crisis and consternation struck. In early May, we were informed that we would be transferred to another camp within a week. The chief tunnellers, Canadians Harry Calvert and Don Sugden, were called upon for a reliable estimate of the length of the tunnel. Jock Alexander, our camp leader, asked Cal, "Is it now beyond the wire, or is it still within the confines of the camp?" Well, after a while of working things out, the answer to this critical question came back. "Another 2 days will, in our opinion," said Cal, "get the tunnel just beyond the wire." If their estimate was accurate, we were within grasp of freedom. If not, we could be in a lot of trouble. The risk of being discovered was much higher than we would have liked, but we knew that it was now or never. The decision was made. We would go in 2 days. Furious activity began among the would-be escapers, organising individual escape kits, drawing lots for a place in the queue, writing farewell letters for friends to post home if the worst happened, secreting Red Cross food which had been saved over previous weeks, and so on. By contrast, the escapees, 52 out of 182 wanted to go. They were silent that night, sitting alone, wrapped in their thoughts, now facing the reality of risking their lives for freedom. I realised that by extreme coincidence, I would emerge from the tunnel exactly 1 year, almost to the minute, after I'd been shot down. At 11:30 p.m, with charcoal blackened faces and hands, we began to enter the tunnel, making sure that the escape gear we carried did not cause obstructions and that we made no noise as we crouched in the confines of the ever so small passage. Deathly silence, broken only by muffled voices up front. We all, I'm sure, were keyed up, apprehensive, scared, pulse racing, adrenaline pumping, wanting to get it over with. The tunnel was breached around midnight, and Calvert and Sugden were the first out, followed by Jock Alexander, our camp leader. Thereafter, it was by ballot, and I was number 11. As my head emerged into the fresh air, I took a greedy gulp and looked around. To my horror, I saw that we'd just cleared the perimeter wire by about 1 metre, and the outside light from our hut was shining right on my head. This left us in the direct gaze of any guard who might happen to look our way. However, nothing for it but to begin my crawl, face down, towards the trees some 100 metres from the breakout point. There was deathly silence, with the possibility of a bullet in the back of the head at any moment. Time seemed to go awfully slowly, and it seemed to me that I took several hours to make those trees. I don't think I've ever been so scared. My mouth was so drained of saliva that I couldn't talk for a while after I knew I was safe. Anyhow, we made our rendezvous, Chappie and Wingy and me, and we rested briefly in the dense forest. Let's go, I said. We haven't time to spare, and we have to put as much mileage between us and the Jerrys before dawn as we can. Then we were off into the night. Our objective was to link up with General Mikhailovich, leader of the Yugoslav resistance at that time, and our plan was to travel south by night and hide up in the daytime. We were at loose for 10 exciting and eventful days and nights, stealing food, jumping trains at night, hiding during the day as we headed south. 10 days later, we were the 48th to be caught. And when we were finally taken back to camp, we were surprised to find that the German Army administration had been withdrawn and the camp was now under the complete control of the Gestapo. The menacing black uniforms did nothing to relieve our apprehension as to what might happen to us. Our 10 days of freedom were packed full of exciting moments, as you can imagine, and adrenaline rushes, as you may well imagine, but all of this is another story. We later discovered that the extent of the breakout and the consternation it caused within the German military hierarchy and the civil reactions it led to had made frontline news. Police stations throughout the country were issued with wanted posters giving particulars and photographs of the escapees. And the skies were busy with light aircraft, which we learned had been taken off other duties temporarily to search for us. We were all recaptured within 10 days. We had chalked up a few records unwittingly in our attempts to seek our own paths to freedom. The length of the tunnel was 42 metres, making it longer than any tunnel of World War I and the longest so far in World War II. The total of 52 escapees made it the largest breakout to that time. It was also the only tunnel from which all who intended to actually got away. Subsequently, the Great Escape at Tulliglow 3 wiped out all of these records. Just as an aside, many tunnels were built by hopeful prisoners during the war, but only 7 were successful. Nearly 200 airmen escaped out of them, but of these only 8 managed to make it back to England. This is, you'll agree, a pitifully small success figure, but it wasn't for the want of trying. I managed 2 more escapes, the last one of which was from the infamous Long March, and that was successful, so I celebrated the end of the war VE Day by dancing in the streets of Brighton with some pretty nurses. I visited Blighty again this year to celebrate that very day 70 years ago, but more of that another time. The infamous Long March began at the end of 1944, when Hitler gave orders to march the millions of prisoners he held to northwestern Germany. He intended to use these as a bargaining weapon, and if the Allies insisted on unconditional surrender, his direct orders were to shoot all the prisoners. Thousands of prisoners died on the Long March. You can see how that stretches right to the horizon. Died on the Long March. Those who fell behind were either shot or left by the roadside to die. It's estimated conservatively that between September 1944 and May 1945, some 8,348 British and American prisoners died in captivity, and between 1,500 and 2,500 prisoners were killed on the Long March. Prisoners carried their swags in various ways, some even building small sleds to drag behind them on the snow. As the march continued, they discarded one item after another to lighten the load. The skies were alive with aircraft bombing and strafing, and we were marching near Gresser one day when 6 rocket-firing typhoons appeared on the horizon. They flew past us in formation, very low, and as I turned around to watch them, they turned back towards us, and I felt my pulse quicken as I realised what was coming. "They're going to hit us," I yelled out to Herbie, and dived into a ditch by the side of the road with several bodies soon on top of me. My survival instincts, which had been sharply honed over the years, had not failed, and I had been the first to hit the dirt. And then came the typhoons. Those deadly rockets hit the bitumen and exploded in the midst of all the tightly packed prisoners, cutting a swathe through the bodies in a crescendo of instant death, spraying blood and body parts everywhere. The terrible noise of the rockets and cannon shells striking the road in a horrific few seconds merged with the roar of the aircraft engines and the screams and cries of the maimed and wounded. The carnage left by those typhoons in a few short seconds was unbelievable. Bodies were flung in the air, there were dead and dying prisoners and guards strewn across the road in bloody confusion. 60 Allied prisoners were killed and nearly 100 were seriously injured. After that, Herb and I decided that the scales had tipped in favour of escape. In the confusion we slipped away and headed for the Western Front. Then began the routine of once more hiding by day and stealing food and travelling by night. Retreating German soldiers were mostly either disinterested or concerned with their own affairs, as were the German civilians. But we just had to be very careful because the SS troops, it's unbelievable what they did. The SS troops, which were to be seen everywhere, were a real hazard. At this stage of the war, they took no prisoners. The young boys were the worst. The young SS kids, 16, 17-year-old, if they caught escaped prisoners, they were either shot or hanged from the nearest tree. We moved cautiously at first, avoiding soldiers and civilians alike, stealing whatever we could at night where we could, crossing fields and streams, keeping away from well-used thoroughfares. For several days we moved slowly westward, sometimes showing ourselves and scrounging food when we could not find any to steal. After a few days, activity seemed to increase, and on one occasion we encountered a column of German Tiger tanks travelling eastward, and the commander popped open his turret to take his bearings. I told him we were escaped prisoners and asked how far away was the front line. He was not at all happy, as you can imagine, but he did tell me that it was about 50 kilometres to the west. I went through quickly, for the tank commander's mood was not conducive to friendly chatter. And when we were out of earshot, Herbie gave me a substantial burst. "You bloody stupid fool," he said. "I can't believe you just did that. That bastard could have shot us." "Well," I replied, "they weren't SS, and now we know how far we are from the Brits." For the next 2 days, we could hear the sounds of sporadic gunfire, but saw no signs of an approaching battle. The only sounds we were acutely aware of were the constant roar of aircraft screaming overhead. Typhoons, Spitfires, Hurricanes, Thunderbolts, Mustangs, all looking for moving targets to strafe or bomb. At this point, we came to a small stream with a stone bridge across it, with the sounds of sporadic small arms fire accompanied by heavier caliber cannon becoming louder. We figured our showdown was approaching, and we decided to take cover underneath the stone bridge and show ourselves when we were sure that we were on the right side of the front line, that is, when the front line had passed over us. It wasn't long, actually, when a column of tanks surrounded a corner about 400 metres from us and began to rumble towards us. "Are they Germans or Brits?" asked Herbie. I wasn't certain, but as they approached, we became sure they were friendly, so we came out from under our cover and waved a large white sheet which we had previously acquired for precisely this purpose. Up rolled the leading tank, now followed by a column of tanks. The tank stopped and the commander opened his turret. "Who are you?" he said. "Identify yourselves." "We're Aussies," I replied. "We escaped a couple of weeks ago and we're making our way towards the front line. I guess we've made it." "You sure have," he replied with a grin. "It's over for you boys. Here, take these." He handed out a bottle of schnapps, a packet of cigarettes, and a large bar of chocolate. "Get on the outside of that," he said. "So long, good luck, I've got work to do." Then down popped the turret and off went the leader, followed by his now long retinue of tanks, like a mother duck leading the waddling ducklings. Still in a daze, Herb and I hugged each other, danced around like madmen, finally sank down by the side of the road as it began to dawn on us we were at last free men. We made our way to the corner where we found a large farmhouse with a farmer and his wife and 2 teenage daughters. To their obvious relief, our demands were simple. We wanted a hot bath, some clean clothes, a good meal, and a sleep in a bed with clean white sheets. All of these were things we had not had for 4 years. Next morning, we put our plan into action. We thumbed a ride with a van travelling fast towards the front, which was now east of our position. Our good luck was still holding, for we had flagged down the brigade commander, who was on his way back to the front after having attended a divisional conference. The young brigadier was very friendly, and when he heard our plan, he said, "Hop in, boys, I'll get you there soon." I had explained to him that we wanted to get to a recently overrun town so that we could find a nice car and become mobile. Our plan was then to drive to Paris, sell the car, whoop it up in Paris with the proceeds, and then go back to Blighty when our money ran out. The brigadier dropped us off at a freshly occupied town, and I immediately asked a local German where the mayor lived. It wasn't far, and I knocked on his door. It opened slowly to reveal a thin, rather nervous man who seemed rather apprehensive. In as threatening a voice as I could muster, I demanded, "Hatten Sie ein Auto?" And he answered in the affirmative, yes, he has got a car. And then I said, "Wir müssen es requieren für militärisches Zweck. Wie kommen Sie es, bitte? We have to commandeer this for military purposes and bring it here, please." We were delighted to find out that he had an Opel Kadett in good condition. It was not long before we were on our merry way to Paris, fighting against massive traffic going the other way. We finally arrived at Brussels, exhausted and nauseous. There we were compelled to seek treatment in an American field hospital for 3 days. The 3-day break gave us time to rest and think, and the result was a drastic change of plans. Alex said, "Herb, after these last 3 days, I'm wondering how we're going to find it in Paris. I suppose there'll be chaos with all the froggies flocking into their beloved city. I'm beginning to have doubts about the wisdom of trying to drive there. Maybe we should sell our car here and get a flight back to Blighty from here. Let's see how soon we can get home." Well, we then discovered that aircraft were flying back from Brussels almost non-stop, but with the war still on the waiting time in the queue for returning, with the war still on, the waiting time in the queue for returning ex-prisoners of war was nevertheless weeks. Our jaws dropped. To get there any earlier seemed impossible. Well, impossible? Not quite. There are always ways and means for inventive minds. We located the RAF Area Transport Officer, a young flight lieutenant, and engaged him in a serious discussion. About an hour later, we gleefully boarded a homeward-bound Lancaster, and as we walked up the steps, we turned to see a flight lieutenant with a large grin on his face dropping into his pocket the keys to a nice Opel Kadett. Thus ended our war. Well, during the war, I completed a special exam from Oxford University for prisoners of war, certificate in social sciences, and I also half completed an economics degree from London University, a BSc in economics. I completed that after the war. Perhaps I should say that the Red Cross were absolutely marvellous, of course, to us. We had our Red Cross food parcels. I'm sure that many prisoners of war would have had trouble in continuing to remain alive on some of the rations that we had, especially in winter time when things were pretty bad, also bad for the Germans. But the Red Cross parcels were really what saved us on many occasions. But apart from that, the International Red Cross was responsible for enabling many, many tens of thousands of prisoners to forward their studies even while they were prisoners. What would happen is the Swedish Red Cross is in our camp it was mainly the Swedish Red Cross. They would send representatives in, and we could, the various academic organisations, in this case University of London, University of Oxford, appointed accredited teachers in the statics, and also when examinations were sat under scrutiny, the papers were then collected by the Swedish Red Cross and sent to England, sent to the various organisations responsible for structuring the studies, and then when the results were available, they were sent back by the Red Cross to the various camps. And really, it's difficult to overstate the help that the Red Cross had given to so many millions, I guess, of prisoners.